for the opportunity to present our considered thoughts on the Building Bridges report. As elected leaders of Nairobi City County, the capital of Kenya, we represent 4.3 million citizens, approximately 10% of the population of the entire Republic of Kenya. The people we represent come from all the communities of Kenya. They have diverse political and religious persuasions and are from different classes of society, from the top to the bottom of the economic pyramid. They're hard at work trying to eke out a living, looking for economic opportunities, or in school, working to secure their futures. While the people we represent have a great diversity in their needs, there have fewer differences in their collective ambitions, and they have minimal discrepancies in their vision for Kenya and for the county many of them call home, Nairobi County. As Nairobians, we have borne the brunt of divisive politics that have often led to destruction of property and the loss of lives. We know too well the pains of ethnically driven politics as well as the joys of peace and unity. And we are aware that despite all this, the needs of the people of Nairobi do not know tribe and do not know political affiliations. Our challenges are the same in this city. There is no Luya pothole, there is no Kamba lack of water, there is no Luo traffic. Our challenges are all the same in this city. And that's why we say in Nairobi that there are only two tribes, the rich and the poor. Therefore, our submissions reflect this diversity, and even as you see, the number of members who've signed are from all political parties represented in Nairobi and from all different communities. Our submissions reflect this diversity and this collective ambition that every Nairobian shares. All our people, we believe, want the same thing. They want to go about their lives peacefully, they want to make something out of themselves, and they want to guarantee their children a future. We have gone through the entire report and the recommendations on the thematic areas, and largely, and it's good for us to state at the outset that we largely support the recommendations and the initiative and the intentions of it. We have, however, isolated a few areas of concern to us and to the people we represent, and we, just because of time, chose to focus on 3 of those areas. The first area is devolution and Nairobi. The second one is allocation of resources, and the third is representation of the people. So I'll go straight to the first point, devolution and Nairobi. Paragraph 190 in chapter 11 of the BBI report speaks to the duality of Nairobi, both as a city county as well as its status as a capital city of the Republic. This paragraph also lays emphasis on the status of Nairobi as a host of a global UN headquarters, and thus the need for efficient delivery of essential services and facilitation from the national government. The implicit inferences made from this carefully worded paragraph almost allude to an attempt to alter the current status of Nairobi as a fully devolved county as compared to the other 46 counties of the Republic of Kenya. And I must note that you very carefully worded that paragraph. It was just an implicit reference, but it raises a serious concern with us. However, I must note that paragraph 160 of your report proposes a retention of the 47 counties. Now, while the observations in the BBI report on the status of Nairobi as a host of the UN headquarters, because in the report you say that since Nairobi is a host of UN headquarters, there are certain agreements entered into between the national government and the UN for UNEP to be here and certain essential services. We note that, but it's interesting for the Secretariat to take note or to take into consideration that all of the other UN headquarters in the world, that is New York, Vienna, Geneva, The Hague, operate within devolved or federal arrangements. So Nairobi is not different. New York is a federal state governed by a governor, with New York City, which is the seat of the UN headquarters, being led by a mayor and a council. Vienna has been a federal state, what they call Bundesland, since 1920, with a state parliament and a mayor who doubles up as the Landeshauptmann, that's how they call it, which means governor of the state of Vienna. Geneva is run by an executive government of the city of Geneva and an administrative council led by a mayor who is one of 4 heads of departments, and it rotates every year That is the arrangement in Geneva. The other comparisons, and I think it was alluded to earlier when the Council of Governors was presenting, the other comparisons to Nairobi that have been frequently used as a basis for Nairobi to cede its status as a devolved county and to exist simply as a seat of national government have been Abuja, what they call the Federal Capital Territory in Nigeria, Washington, D.C. in the United States, and Canberra in Australia. It is worth noting that in all these cases, the federal governments moved from what were earlier the most popular cities or capitals to create new capital cities, specifically for political and administrative purposes. In Abuja, for instance, the FCT was built in the 1980s to replace the city of Lagos as a capital on the 12th of December 1961. So they moved from Lagos to Abuja, 1991. Washington, D.C. was created by the signing of an act of Congress, the Residence Act, on the 1st of July, 16th of July 1790, as a capital city. The states of Maryland and Virginia donated land to form the federal district along the Potomac River. Canberra in Australia was formed after New South Wales donated land, and following the enactment, and they also had a law called the Seat of Government Act in 1908 that created Australian Capital Territory, 2 years prior to the capital city being founded and formally named as Canberra in 1913. In none of these cases was an already existing, thriving city where the citizens were already enjoying the rights of representation and exercise of sovereignty converted into a capital territory. The respective federal or national governments moved. Thus, we wish to note the following. The highlight of our constitution, which I think is one of the most progressive constitutions in the world, and pundits have said that all over. The highlight of the 2010 constitution is devolution of power and resources to people at the county level. The objects, if you look at Article 174 of the constitution, the objects and the principles of devolution, some of them are to promote democratic and accountable exercise of power, to give powers of self-governance to the people and enhance the participation of the people in the exercise of powers of the state in making decisions that affect them, to recognize the right of communities to manage their own affairs and to further their development, to protect and promote the interests and rights of minorities and marginalized communities, and to promote social and economic development and the provision of proximate, easily accessible services throughout Kenya. Honorable Wanyonyi will later even tell you, as a member of a single-member constituency, how following 2013, the issue of proximate delivery of services changed even in Nairobi, in the lowest level possible. Devolution is based on the principle of subsidiarity. A service is best offered at the lowest level compatible with the benefit area of that service. And Nairobians have been enjoying that. The authors of the Constitution held that these objects and principles are to be enjoyed by all Kenyans throughout the territory of Kenya. Indeed, it is unfathomable to imagine a proposed constitutional amendment or provision that would thus inherently be discriminatory to any category of Kenyans occasioned by the county of their birth or residence. Further to this, Article 1, 4 of the Constitution, which talks about sovereignty, and I think which is a key provision, provides that the sovereign power of the people is exercised at the national level and at the county level. The people of Nairobi must thus be allowed to exercise the sovereignty at both levels of government. Nairobians, being 10% of the population of Kenya, according to the last census, should also not be limited in their enjoyment of their rights under Article 38 of the Constitution. I know many people see Nairobi as a transient county, like it's transitional, that everyone has roots elsewhere. But that is Nairobi of the 50s and the 60s, possibly. Nairobi of today has people whose only identity is in Nairobi. I was born 2.2 kilometers from where we're sitting today. For my children, this is their Ushago. And my grandchildren, it will even be worse. And many Nairobians. Mheshimiwa Tim has his identity in Nairobi. And so the idea that Nairobi is everyone's. There's that lady in Waithaka whose father is buried in Udhiru. She deserves devolution the same way as the lady in Busia as a lady in Kadwana, in Tharaka-Nithi, as any other Kenyan. And that is why we say Nairobi has an identity. It has ownership. It has people who see it as their home, not just a place to work. While we note and we accept and we agree, there have been challenges in the implementation of devolution in Nairobi due to its unique status and challenges, we hold that this calls for strengthening of devolution in Nairobi as opposed to clawing back the gains already made and already given to the people of Nairobi through the Constitution. We believe that Nairobi can work and indeed thrive if specific special arrangements are made that will address the unique status of Nairobi without disenfranchising 4.3 million Kenyans who deserve the gift of devolution like the rest of Kenyans. It is important to also note that the Nairobi City County as a county is not mutually exclusive to the Nairobi metropolitan area. Nairobi as a metropolis in that respect must be viewed within the larger context. That is, some parts of Kajiado, Murang'a, Kiambu, and Machakos are part of Nairobi metropolis. Any city that is a 21st century global capital, because Nairobi is the global capital of, is a capital of the global south, in all respects. It's the gateway to Africa. But it must be seen as a metropolis, And just seeing it as that doesn't mean, because I've not had anybody proposing, that then we also, take back Kajiado, Murang'a, Kiambu, and Machakos because of that metropolitan identity that Nairobi must have. And we are proposing how we can go about that. Already there are provisions in the Urban Areas and Cities Act, as well as the Constitution, that provide for a special relationship between Nairobi and the national government. This means that while retaining the devolved status of Nairobi, there is need for a special arrangement between the national government and Nairobi City County as a special county and just as one of the counties within the Nairobi metropolitan area. So you must see the metropolitan area superseding or transcending the Nairobi City as a county, because the metropolitan area includes Nairobi County, Murang'a County, Kiambu County, and Kajiado County. We therefore propose as follows. 1, that Nairobi City County be retained as a county as provided for in the current constitution, with its people enjoying the rights to representation and expression of sovereignty at both levels of government like all other Kenyans. 2, that further to this, Nairobi be formally accorded special status as a special county for the purposes of funding and shared responsibilities between Nairobi City County and the national government. 3, pursuant to Article 191 of the Constitution, which talks about subsidiary legislation in support of counties, we enact the Nairobi Metropolitan Area Act, which will provide for some of these shared roles between the Nairobi government, between the national government and the Nairobi City County government, together with the surrounding metropolitan counties. And 3, in that chapter, that Nairobi as a special county, and I will go further into that, be exempt from the formula on county allocation of resources, of revenue, due to its unique needs and current inequalities, as we shall demonstrate in the next session. So I will demonstrate that in the next section. Allocation of resources. Currently, the formula that we have for allocation of resources creates serious per capita inequalities across the counties. And I'll give you an example. With the 2018-2019 financial year shareable revenue, Lamu County had the highest per capita allocation, 24,653, while Nairobi had the lowest, 3,591. This means that in a country of fairness and equity, a person in Lamu County, and I'm just speaking that because it is the extreme, a person in Lamu County is allocated 8 times, in terms of service delivery and attention, 8 times the amount of money a person in Nairobi County is allocated. 8 times. Yet they're all Kenyans and they all need services. Illustratively, if the people of Nairobi had a similar per capita allocation as those in Lamu, for instance, in the last financial year, Nairobi would have received 126.4 billion as shareable revenue, as opposed to 15.8 billion that has received. And I've put there a graph, though I think it's not too clear. I'll share another one of the changes in the different counties in terms of per capita allocation, because we devolve to give services to the people. I have many other things to say on the formula for allocation, but I will just speak over them. There are other variables. It might not be a constitutional issue, but it's something that we must be alive to, that we've been using, that don't necessarily shed light, but they shed heat. And I'll give you an example. We have poverty, land, and fiscal effort as the factors. The ratio of money shared on the poverty parameter is calculated using the average poverty index of a county. Consequently, if two counties share the same poverty index, they receive equal allocations. Poverty index is a measure of darkness. It does not measure light. Because of the kind of inequalities in Nairobi, for instance, you average it out. And I can give you an example of Kibra constituency. Kibra constituency has the lowest level of poverty and the highest level of poverty. The late President Moi was a resident of Kibra constituency. Upper Hill, the financial district of Kenya, is in Kibra constituency. The poverty index in that part of Kibra is, of course, extremely different from the poverty index in the real Kibra that we know. So we lose out. Most countries that are have more progressive variables use things like Human Development Index, because HDI will tell you access to water, access to roads, access to amenities, which is the real reason for devolution. So poverty index is telling you the ratio of the rich to the poor. HDI tells you what service is needed where. So that leaves us with a lot of inequalities. The ratio of money shared on land factor is calculated as a proportion of the county's square kilometers, because that's the other factor. We look at land. So when you look at land, counties with sparse population are receiving money for uninhabited land, because you're looking at the entire square kilometers. So you're giving money to counties because of the size of their lakes, rivers, parks, reserves, the allocated funds. Yet, money is not allocated to the area for which the county government is executing its functions. Only 10% of counties share 70% of the funds under that parameter. Now, the third variable is fiscal effort, which is measured as the improvement or lack thereof on revenue collections by a county. Meaning counties that are previously not collecting revenue and they just start will now get higher allocation than counties that have previously been collecting revenue in their towns. So it's almost like encouraging bad behavior. The higher the percentage improvement, the more the money allocated on this factor. Now, development factor funds counties with little development, and it incentivizes underdevelopment, because the more a county is underdeveloped, the more money they get. So in case I was one of those governors for life, and 70 to close 70% of the criteria to give me money is how poor we are and how many we are. So I'll make sure we overpopulate and remain poor and not develop, as opposed to competing. Countries like India have a provincial GDP as one of the variables. That the increase in GDP, we want counties to be competitive. We have a Commission of Revenue Allocation. We are talking about how to divide the pie, but we need more discussion, as said in the BBI report, on how to bake the pie. We might soon need a Commission of Revenue Generation, because everybody is keen on how to spend it. So a formula is required that spreads out shareable revenue across counties in a fair way, without grossly advantaging sections of our population against a majority of the people. Due to Nairobi's unique status, and I promise you, in as much as the first two administrations in Nairobi have not done well on many respects, the amount of money given to Nairobi is actually not enough. Nairobi needs a minimum of 50 billion. Of course, Nairobi has a capacity, and studies have been done by the Bretton Woods institutions around, by the big four firms, PwC, etc., that Nairobi has the capacity to collect 100 billion. But today we're collecting 10, and we're getting 15.8 from the Senate through the allocation of revenue. A budget of 30 billion is hardly enough when you're paying salaries in a year of 18 billion to begin with. Operation and maintenance, another 10 billion. So due to this special status, if we recognize it, the city county should be exempt from application of this formula, and special funding arrangements be provided through legislation contemplated above. And I can give you examples world over of more difficult cities than Nairobi. If you look at Buenos Aires, if you look at Mexico City, if you look at Lagos, what Governor Fashola was able to do in such a short time, it is possible. We can get Nairobi right. So let us not give up. We have done try one, try two, we will get it right as we go ahead. Now, on marginalization policy, there is a huge misconception that assumes that Nairobians do not live in under harsh conditions or marginalized conditions. This has led to Nairobi constituencies not featuring whenever any remedial action is taken to cushion the public in marginalized areas. In addition, Nairobi has not featured prominently in attempts towards equalization or in the marginalization policy. Even when there is drought, when there is a problem, we see trucks going to Northeastern, we see trucks going to, the Azal areas in Eastern Province, Ukambani. But in Nairobi, I promise you, urban poverty bites harder than rural poverty in many respects. Very little food is grown in Nairobi, and all residential arrangements are commercial. If you have no money in Nairobi, tunasema ni shamba ya mawe. If you have no money in Nairobi, you will sleep outside and you will stay hungry. But if you're in Kakamega, utaletewa gorogoro moja ya mahindi by someone. Outside of the backyard, something is growing that is edible. On your fence even. There will be food for you. But in Nairobi, utakula mawe. So there is need for the urban poor in our informal settlements, in our slums, to be considered. And those wards and constituencies, Honorable Team will give you examples in Westlands, in many areas, which have never featured. Kibra is not featuring, Soweto is not featuring, Madara is not featuring. But those people are possibly having a harder time than those who are always receiving relief food. Maybe, Honorable Team, you can say something on that point.
Yeah, on the issue of poverty index, for example, the people who look at